Hey, welcome in to the Email Design Podcast. I am your host today, Kevin Mandeville. This is a podcast where you can come in and get all the latest news on email design, development, and marketing. And it's just going to be me today riding solo here on the podcast. Jason is out sick. It's just been a crazy couple of weeks with the holidays around, and we actually had a team meetup 1 week. So it's been a couple of weeks since we had a podcast. Wanted to make sure we got one out to you. So today we're going to go through the Litmus community and ask and answer some of your questions that you've provided. So we're going to get into that in a second. Before we dive in, I just want to let you know you can check the podcast out at emaildesignpodcast.com. Full archive there, over 80 episodes now, and all the show notes and links. So everything we discussed, you can catch all the resources right there. You can tweet along with the hashtag Email Design Podcast and subscribe on SoundCloud, YouTube, and iTunes. And definitely leave some likes, leave some good reviews if you like the podcast. All right, so let's get into some of your favorite questions. So this is coming from litmus.com/community. It's a free forum, essentially. It's a great place to go, ask your questions, and get them answered by experts. This global sort of resource knowledge base of just email geeks helping each other out. So the first one I want to dive into is recently Gmail started introducing what has been termed the Goomoji, basically inserting their own emojis for a couple of different symbols, primarily the registration mark, the trademark, and the copyright symbol. So you can see it here sort of in this Litmus post on the RTM and copyright symbols. They're sort of these blue emojis that they've created. And unfortunately, this sort of happened right around Black Friday, Cyber Monday, one of the busiest times in the year for email. The good news is, as of today, as of right now, they've actually released a fix and sort of rolled back this change. So you shouldn't be seeing this behavior anymore, which is really good news. But I want to go over sort of the hacks around it in case it comes up again. And so sort of thanks to Arturo Ramirez-Siles and Naresh Viradima for sort of asking this in community. And Mark Robbins actually had some good answers as to how to get around this. So probably the simplest way of getting around this is to just use the HTML character entities for those symbols. So, for copyright, you could use ampersand, hashtag 9426 semicolon, right? You could do stuff like that. Use the pure HTML character entities for copyright or registered symbols. For trademark, unfortunately, there isn't an actual entity, but what you could do is use the superscript tag. So you could do the tag of sup with TM in it, and obviously support might vary a little bit for email clients there, but it's probably going to be as simple as you can get for a solution. The other method Mark introduced, which I thought was really smart, is that let's say you wanted to sort of manually control this. What you could do in the HTML is actually wrap the symbol in an entire span tag, and you're going to have a class associated with that span. And nested inside, directly next to the symbol, you can actually put an underline tag, a U tag. And what you can do in the CSS is you can make sure by targeting the class that you hide the image in display none, because that's what Gmail is essentially doing by default for it. So you can hide the image that Gmail is displaying on its own. And then essentially with the U tag, you can target it to essentially add your own background image for those different symbols. So you can create your own trademark, copyright, registration, registered symbols and use them as background images. So that's a smart, nifty little hack to get around that rendering if and when it ever does pop back up or you see another email client doing something similar. So again, try to figure out ways you could possibly, target the email client. And this isn't even necessarily targeting Gmail by itself. You do Gmail targeting, which we're going to get into in a second. So that's just a nice little hack. But hopefully this, again, they rolled back this behavior. You shouldn't be seeing this right now, which is good news. So on to our next question from Patrick Scholes asking about CSS targeting on gmail.com, webmail only. So he was asking, he wanted to essentially differentiate between Gmail webmail and Gmail apps. And there's several different ways that you could target Gmail. The first here, and really the one that I recommend, is being able to use the underline tag, so the U tag in your CSS, which again, Gmail will transfer. It'll basically take the doc type and make that an underline tag, which is how it's targetable via CSS. So you can do U with the general sibling selector div. It converts the body tag to a div. So you're essentially just targeting down the line of going doc type at the very top, which is an underline tag. And then the very next thing will be the body tag, which gets converted to a regular div. And then you can just use whatever class of whatever nested element you have underneath the body. That's an easy way to target Gmail. And so to differentiate sort of between desktop, mobile, again, you can just sort of have this generic targeting technique here. What you can then do to differentiate between desktop and mobile is you can have a max width or min width media query depending on what environment you're trying to target. So again, in this example here, udiv red, this is going to target all of Gmail clients and make the text red. But if you just wanted to target mobile, for instance, you could just do a max width media query. And this text here of blue, it's only going to be blue on mobile. So that's an easy way to target it. One thing I want to point out about Patrick's question as well is he references the very old targeting technique in Gmail for the summary attribute. So here he was talking about, well, I've been using adding a summary attribute to the HTML tag and then using it in the CSS. You can no longer do this and target Gmail this way. The reason why is that with Gmail's rendering update back in 2016 or so last year, it was September, October, they remove support for attribute selectors in the CSS. And the way that Gmail handles CSS now is that any CSS that it deems invalid or doesn't support, it's going to strip out the entire style block. So if you try to use this attribute selector method in the style block, it's going to remove not just that sort of declaration and properties associated with it, it's going to remove everything within that style block. So you want to make sure any CSS for Gmail that isn't going to be supported, that gets separated out into its own style block so that your Gmail rendering doesn't get impacted. But don't use that. Use this method I talked about with the underline general sibling selector div approach. Next question comes to us from Mary Tanner asking around Outlook.com and Office 365 conditional statement for hiding content not working. So she's trying to use the conditional statement of if GTE MSO9 and IE, which is a typical conditional Outlook comment, but this does not apply to the webmail. This only applies to the desktop versions of Outlook on Windows. So this is targeting Outlook 2000 to Outlook 2016 on Windows. It uses Microsoft Word as a rendering engine for those versions, and these conditional comments are only going to target those specific versions. So again, Outlook conditional comments are not going to work on Outlook.com or Office 365 because it's an entirely separate rendering engine, and you can't target it that way. What you can do for targeting is you can use an attribute selector in the CSS. If you just do an empty attribute selector, and developers have kind of taken up the convention of using OWA as an empty attribute selector to start our CSS declaration, just as a way to say, okay, this is going to be for Outlook web app, for Outlook.com and Office 365. We're trying to just standardize that. It could be any text inside, but if you just do OWA and then whatever class you have, what Outlook does is it actually just removes that empty attribute selector and then it applies the CSS. No other client behaves that way because that's not the proper way to render CSS. It would detect that there is no attribute selector with that in the HTML and then just not render the CSS. So this is a nice, nifty little hack of being able to target any element specifically in Outlook.com or Office 365. So in the case of trying to hide something, you could just do OWA with your class and then use Displaynone. Related to hiding things in Outlook, George Deligianis asked about MSO hide all doesn't work in Outlook 2003. So what's interesting about CSS in Outlook is that there's over 200 unique CSS properties to the word rendering engine. And they typically have the MSO or -ms prefix. And MSO hide all is actually one method of being able to hide things. To be honest with you, I'm not even a complete expert on MSO hide all. it does depend on what type of element you're trying to use it on. So I think it works best at like the table cell or table level, but I've had issues with it myself. That's not my favorite method of hiding, and I don't think it's the most bulletproof. What I prefer and what I recommend is what Kevin George talks about here, is you can actually use Outlook conditional comments to comment out code, whether that be HTML or CSS, and it's just a very bulletproof way. So if you just do if MSO, or in my instance, I'd prefer to do a better version of targeting of if GTE, MSO9, and IE. It depends on what versions you're trying to target. So, this would be a catch-all of targeting Outlook 2000 to Outlook 2016. And what you do is you can basically have this opening code comment here, and then with your end if, you can close it by also adding this extra prefix here. So if you have this statement here of this opening and closing conditional comment, and you put any code in between there, it's just going to comment that out and remove it for that rendering engine of whatever you tried to target. So to me, that is the most bulletproof, surefire way of just removing content from Outlook and being able to hide it. It's a lot more reliable than having to deal with the CSS, in my opinion. So I'd recommend that. All right, so just want to take a second, let you know you can get a free trial of Litmus. It's free 14 days. You can go to litmus.com/gift card, coupon code podcast. You can get a free 14-day trial of Litmus, where you can test your email. And we have over 80, I think it's even close to 90. It might be over 90 different email clients. So when you're testing out all of these rendering tricks, trying to test out, okay, let me get this fix in for this Goomoji stuff in Gmail on the web and in the Gmail apps, or I'm trying to hide content in Outlook.com, Office 365, or maybe the Outlook desktop apps 2016, we've got you covered. We've got basically every type of email client under the sun that you can test your email in, make sure it's rendering and looking the way that you want it to before it goes out the door, because there's nothing worse than subscribers opening their email, it's broken, it's a bad experience, your click rates go down, your unsubscribes go up. You don't want to have that fear when you spend so much time and effort to try to get your email marketing to be really successful. So we want to make sure that your programs are successful and you can test your email before it goes out the door. So again, just go to litmus.com/gift card, input the coupon code podcast for a free 14-day trial. And we have over on the Litmus community as well, speaking of the Litmus community, a jobs board. So you can go to litmus.com/community/jobs. And if you're trying to hire for a job, or if you're looking for a job, it's free to post and it's free to look around. So definitely take advantage of that. And we just want to highlight a few of the jobs that are posted and out there right now. So first off, we have an email deployment specialist at Inbox Marketer. This is a full-time role out in Guelph, Ontario, Canada. I looked it up. It's about an hour outside of Toronto. So you'll really be dealing with a lot of client work here as a deployment specialist, and you definitely need some strong HTML and CSS skills. So that's over at Inbox Marketer in Canada. There's an email marketing specialist role at Adtalem Global Education. They're a global provider of educational services. This is full-time over in Chicago, Illinois. This is going to include creative development, setup, targeting, and testing to deployment and data monitoring. If you have experience with Salesforce.com as a CRM system and Marketing Cloud, Eloqua, and Pardot as ESPs, that would probably be helpful for this role. There's also a digital email developer at the Skipton Building Society. This is a full-time role in Skipton, North Yorkshire, or Yorkshire. Brits, let me know which is the correct way to say that. But this is actually a role that you would be sort of working alongside Paul Airy. Paul Airy is a great email geek, good friend of the podcast, really has done a lot of amazing work, especially in the realm of typography and accessibility for email. So that would be a very, very interesting role to check out. Again, this is going to be development heavy. So again, strong skills on the HTML and CSS side is ideal. And then finally, last role we'll highlight, HTML email developer at Wayfair. This is a full-time role in Boston. Wayfair, it's a really huge e-commerce brand and site. It sounds like this is going to be strictly development. You're going to be working alongside sort of design and marketing to translate designs into HTML email templates. So yeah, definitely having a good strong foundation of HTML and CSS here would be ideal. So again, just go to litmus.com/community/jobs, check out free jobs or post a job for free if you're hiring. And we also have a nice new Twitter for you. You can go to twitter.com/jobs for email. So at jobs for email, you can follow it. Jobs get posted automatically there as soon as they go live. So definitely stay in the loop there. All right, on to this question coming in from Mary Tanner. Does Displaynone prevent an image from loading? And this is a great question, one that gets asked often. And so just because you use Displaynone on an element in the CSS does not prevent that element from loading. It's in the HTML and it's visually being hidden, but the asset is still being downloaded, whether that's through email or on the web. Unless there's something unique about a way an email client might parse that out to just not be in the HTML at all. But if it's in the HTML and living there, it will download this. So it's a common misconception that throwing display none or visibility hidden or opacity 0 or anything like that will prevent an image from loading. That's not the case. That asset will still load. If you had something through JavaScript to pipe it in, then that would change it, but just using CSS, it's not going to behave that way. What you could do is you could CSS background image, and that won't be loaded until that asset sort of comes into focus and being active. So if you had, let's say, an interactive email or something, some type of hover event, a click event using the check pseudo selector, and it was a background image that got activated, that wouldn't load until that point. But just using Displaynone on an inline image or something, that's not going to work. Brett Davis has a really interesting question around embedded CSS results versus inline CSS results. So he says that his team is testing A/B testing an embedded CSS template versus an inline CSS template. And the goal was to keep engagement numbers, opens, and clicks at least flat and decrease the number of emails being clipped by Gmail. The design is identical. And he says that we're seeing a dip in clicks with the embedded CSS template, but aren't sure what's causing this result. So he says, if you're embedding at least 95% of your CSS, how is it affecting your email metrics? If you're seeing similar results, have you narrowed down the cause? And I would say, awesome, Brett, for sort of taking initiative and sort of experimenting with embedded CSS. I don't think a lot of people are really trying this out currently. So this is an interesting case, and it's definitely not going to be related as long as you don't have a super large international audience. So international webmails like mail.ru, there's a couple of webmails out there that don't support embedded CSS. But in the case of Gmail, I would take a look at your Gmail IMAP opens. So doesn't support embedded CSS. I would say that's probably going to be an edge case of your audience, but it would be good to try to ballpark how large of an audience that is. What I would guess would be the larger impact would be users who have images off by default. There's a bug currently with Gmail, the way that it parses the CSS, that it doesn't properly apply CSS if you have images off and then try to turn it on. It doesn't match up the classes, unfortunately, and it sort of breaks and mangles the email. So it could be that if your email is super styled, very heavy on graphics, imagery, or styling, and it looks very different compared to whatever the non-embedded CSS version looks, that could potentially be causing a decrease in clicks, right? Because you may not have really large buttons to click on, things like that. So I would take a look at your Gmail behavior, because that's where I would assume that there might be a bit of a decrease. And so that might be a consideration for you. But hopefully, I don't know what the exact numbers are here in terms of how much his numbers are going down, but hopefully it's minuscule. Hopefully it's something relatively small. If it's something really, really large, that would be very interesting. And I'd love to talk about that more and have Brett talk about that more. But yeah, definitely chime in on this because nobody else has commented on this thread. It would be very interesting to see if anybody's doing similar, has similar results, or has other theories around it. And finally, last question today comes to us from Emmanuel A. He is looking for an email development workflow. So he says, hi, email divs. I'm looking for a grunt gulp task tool that will do the following. He wants something that will parse his SCSS, so SAS, take the resulting CSS and minimize, so minify it, take the minified CSS and plug it into an empty style tag in the project HTML, take the resulting HTML and put it in a separate HTML. Something with an inliner would also help. As you can see, only concerned about speeding CSS development only. Any recommendations? And yes, I know about Mailjet and Inky. Thanks. So Daniel Riggs, he puts in a plug, which thanks Daniel. He puts in a plug for Litmus Builder. So far, it's been working well for him. So Builder, it has a CSS inliner, which was built specifically for email. It's the #1 ranked inliner by email developers. Both Mosaic.io ranked it as #1 based off their tests, and it was also the #1 based off the state of email survey that Litmus has provided. It does have partials, so you can use it. Uses handlebars under the hood, so you can use partials to try to modularize and organize your CSS. And there's snippets as well to help do it. I would say the downside to Builder right now is it doesn't support Sass as CSS, so it's really not going to help Emmanuel there. What I would recommend if he's looking for something like that, and there's also no minification in Builder, but my favorite workflow that I've used sort of out of the box is Lee Monroe's grunt email design workflow. So there's a great GitHub repo about it. You can compile your Sass to CSS. It inlines your CSS for you. It helps send tests automatically to Litmus. What I really like about it is there's not a lot of dependencies. It's very, very easy to get up and running with this, which is typically the hard part with a lot of these workflows. Is there's just a lot of external dependencies. It's harder to set up or to maintain, just causes a lot of friction in the process, more ways for it to break down. So I'd recommend checking out Lee's workflow. I really like it, enjoy it when I've used it. And there isn't a minifier built in with it. You could obviously build it into the workflow if you wanted to, or just use a copy and paste site. It seems like he wasn't as concerned with minification, so maybe that could really just be a way to optimize the CSS there and then minify after the fact. Just on the topic of minifying, I really like the Cangax minifier, HTML minifier, but it also has CSS options as well. You can see on the right-hand side here, you get all this customization around how you want to minify it. So this is done well for me if and when I've ever needed to minify something. He's using this Cangax minifier. So if you're okay with even just manually copying and pasting for that step at the very end, that workflow might work out well for you. All right, well, that's going to do it for the edition of the podcast. Reminder, you can catch out emaildesignpodcast.com, full show notes, links, and full archive. Catch up on all the episodes there. Tweet along with the hashtag emaildesignpodcast. Be sure to subscribe on SoundCloud, YouTube, and iTunes. Get the podcast as soon as it drops every week. And don't forget, free 14-day trial of Litmus. Just go to litmus.com/giftcard, input the coupon code podcast. All right. Thanks for listening, Email Geeks. We will see you next week.